Hi everybody, this is Tim here with Fly Fishing Bow River Outfitters. I want to welcome you along, just another Thursday night live fly tying. We're actually shooting this one or streaming this a little ahead of time, and we'll show it to you guys on Thursday night. We decided to come check out a different brewery today. So today we are at Darkwoods Brewing and Roasting. Next to me I have Nick Bell. He's going to tell us a little bit about his establishment, kind of when he started, what he does here. This is actually my hometown, Innisfail, so I'm pretty excited to be here. Nick, over to you. Just tell us a little bit about what you do here.
Yeah, thanks. Well, we started a couple years ago. We actually started brewing beer in my garage probably about 4 years ago now. We moved, it was just me and my brother at that point. We moved our operation over into the Napa store, which is just actually right beside us here. And then beer just started flying off our shelves, and a lot of support here from Innisfail, which is a great community to be with.
Yeah.
And then we decided to kind of go all in, and we built a whole new building and just opened up our tap room here in about 3 weeks ago. And
awesome.
I've been roasting coffee as well for the last, I want to say, about 6 months. So trying to
that's an interesting,
yeah.
doing a little bit of both.
Yeah, can you go from coffee right into
yeah.
beer? So we've been roasting up a few different origins of coffee. Right now we have some El Salvador coffee. We have some Honduras on the espresso bar.
Awesome.
It's been good.
Yeah, so you don't just roast coffee. You have a full espresso bar.
Yeah.
And so do you sell it bagged as well, or is it just serving it?
We got it in 1 pound bags as well, and then
cool.
We obviously have we got all the beers as well. We got 8 different types of beer. We're always adding to the menu every now and then, and trying different things. We have a little brewery as well, kind of a test brewery. So my brother is now the brewmaster of the operation. He's actually my twin brother, so if
I don't even know who I'm talking to right now. You could be somebody else.
Yeah, exactly. He's in his last year of schooling there as well. So
cool.
Out at the Olds College brewmaster course.
Oh, awesome.
He's just kind of finishing up there. That's actually where he is right now. And then so he's trying a bunch of different beers. So.
Cool. And you guys have some food here, which is a little unique, at least to our experience at some breweries, so that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, right now we just kind of have some more of a lunch food. We have some pizza available too for kind of evening. But once we're actually building our kitchen right now, so we'll be able to add quite a bit more to that menu.
A bigger menu.
And bigger menu. People get hungry when they drink, so.
That's true. You might as well capitalize.
Exactly.
Well, we really appreciate you letting us be here today, and hopefully we'll be back with a group of people next time, and we can do some more.
Absolutely.
Thanks, buddy.
All right, yeah,
appreciate it.
Thanks.
All right, guys. Well, this week when we're not with you, we figured we'd work on a couple flies that are a little tougher to do in bigger groups, like we normally do on a Thursday night. We're actually going to do some pike flies today. So we're going to do pretty simple patterns, but at the same time, they just take some unique materials and can take a little bit more time and instruction, so they take a little bit more difficult in a bigger group. So the first fly we're going to tie today is a really simple version. I actually don't know if there's a proper name for this, but I call it a flash blend fly. So big key of this fly is that most of the tail is all done with flash. So it's just simple flash material. Today we're going to do it in kind of this blend. I'm kind of cheating because it makes it even easier. It has lots of different colors in it. The tail is pretty much consistently made of that. Not very material is going to be used in this fly. So today what we're going to be using some bucktail. I'm going to use, this fluorescent orange. We're also going to be using a little bit of SF flash blend. And I'm going to use this in this is like a green olive color. For the head, we're going to be building that out of just a little bit of ripple ice fiber, super cheap material, kind of nasty to work with, but I'll kind of show you the best tips that I've kind of figured with using it. Besides that, that's really about it. Not a ton. We have some eyes that we'll stick on at the end. But besides that, it's pretty simple, but there's some techniques involved with working with bucktail. And I'm going to try to explain to you some of the not only the techniques of tying with it, but the properties of a bucktail. And there's actually different hair as you go up or down the tail, which makes it more appropriate for different purposes. So today what I'm going to be tying on is a pretty big hook. This is, as you said, a pike or musky fly. Might be a little small for a musky, but great for pike. today I'm tying on a partridge hook. This is their Universal Predator, and this is in 6/0. So it's a big hook. The 6/0 might be a little bit overkill, but what I do like about it is we got a nice long shank to work with. So this isn't gonna be an articulated fly. The next one I show you, we're just basically gonna add one step of articulation onto it. But this one's just gonna be one straight hook. But there's lots of movement in the materials that we use today, and that's why we're gonna get a really good moving fly in the water. Now remembering, I don't wanna dumb this down for pike fishing, but pike fishing a lot of times has a lot more to do with color and just getting it to where it needs to be. And more than anything, is there a pike there? Sometimes it feels like you could throw out a wet sock and you'd catch a pike. It doesn't really seem to matter sometimes what you throw at them. Some people in different parts of the world are probably gonna disagree with me, but for our home waters here, if you can find a pike and you get a fly reasonably close to it, chances are it's gonna eat it. So today we're gonna tie in more of a color scheme that could be maybe considered perch in color, oranges, greens, golds. It's probably one of my go-to colors, that or white, white and or black. So this is kind of the more flashy looking colored color scheme that I would use. So what I'm gonna start with, also the other piece of this I should talk about is the thread that you use when you're tying with bucktail. So if we were just to use, let's say, a 6/0 or 3/0 thread, we have to put a lot of tension on it. We want to flare bucktail, we want it to spread out, to get bulk at times. We cannot do it with a regular thread. So today I'm using a Vivus 240, very heavy thread. It would probably cut into your skin before ever breaking. Very, very strong, but it's important to have that thread so that we can tighten down on that bucktail. The downside of that thread is that it's very slippery. So like you tied on something, it wants to slide up and down the shank of the hook. We're gonna use a ton of, if I had it with me, would be using super glue. But what we're gonna use today is just some bone dry, this is Solar Res, UV resin to save our work constantly and to make sure that our thread doesn't go anywhere. It's just a really important thing when you're tying with pike flies is durability. They have nasty teeth and they cut through everything. So just really working with making sure we secure our work. So I'm just gonna go ahead, I'm just gonna start my thread in no real particular place. I'm just gonna work back towards where the barb is, wanting to stay up on top of the hook though. Go in and take out that extra thread. And even right from the very start, it's also very difficult to cut through. I'm just gonna go put a touch right on top, just to secure that initial thread. We don't want it to ever slip around on us, and as we build tension and everything, if it were to move on you and pull materials out of the way, it'd be a real bummer. Okay, so first material that we're gonna put on is we're gonna start with some bucktail. Now if I show you this bucktail here, if you can look all the way up the bucktail itself, you can see down near the base, you have the wide, you can imagine this would be what's actually at basically the butt end of the deer, and this is up at the tip of the tail. So at the tip of the tail, these fibers up here, if I cut those off and I tie them in, they're gonna stay very straight. So a very good area of the tail to use, let's say, for a clouser, because you want those fibers to look very straight. You don't wanna flare them at all. You're looking for a streamlined look. The farther you go down, all the way to the bottom here, these are a lot more hollow hairs. So if I put thread wraps around this bottom stuff and I pull tight, it'll flare those up really big. And I'll show you how we do that. So just understanding, it's like a scale. The higher you go up, the less flare you get. The lower you come down in the tail, the more flare you get. So I've kind of prepped some hair for myself already here, but this first chunk I actually took off about in the middle. So I want some flare, but not a big, bold flare for this first part. So what's gonna brace all this flash and stay up, so it stays up off the back of the fly, is we're gonna put some bucktail on, flare just a little bit, then we're gonna put some SF blend over top of it, and what it's gonna do is it's not gonna allow all of these fibers from the flash to fall into the bucktail. So I'll show you how we do this. So first piece I've got here, once you've got it, you wanna make sure I've already cleaned this out, but you wanna come up here, grab at the tips, and just clean out all the under hair that comes out of it. You wanna get rid of that. A lot of people say, well, how do I get all my tips aligned or my butts aligned? The easiest way to do this, we want all those natural, the gradient of this bucktail. We like that it's all at different lengths at the end, so we actually wanna align the butt. So what you do is you just kinda cup in your hand, like so, and all I do is I kinda tap them, and I cause all those butts to stack up in the palm of my hand, and then I can come up and I can work with this tip, okay? So I've grabbed maybe a pencil width in of width of this stuff. Not a ton, but enough to work with. What I'm gonna do is, I do have a little bit of butts that didn't align there. I'm just gonna snip those off, just so I have everything in line. I'm gonna use the majority of the length of this bucktail. I wanna tie it in right on top. I don't wanna let it slip around at this moment, okay? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna come in, I'm gonna switch hands, I'm gonna come in and take a single loose wrap, another wrap, start to tighten down. You can tell those butt ends aren't really flaring very much because this isn't gonna flare very much at all, in fact. So I'm gonna take some nice securing wraps, and you can see for the most part that stayed right up on top of the hook. So what I'm gonna do is, this technique is I take my thumb, and all I do is I press. And I'm gonna work some of that bucktail around to the sides. I don't want the bucktail on the bottom, but I want it on both sides of the hook as well. So you just use your thumb, kind of split it. We're gonna do the same technique when we work with the flash. And now you can see on the bottom of the hook, it didn't go all the way around. I've controlled where I want it to go. I'm gonna pull tight, take a few more thread wraps. I'm gonna put a little bit of my UV on there, save my work. And then I'm gonna snip out those butt ends the best that I can. Normally I'd be using a Zap-A-Gap. Is probably the best stuff to use when you're working with glue and you're doing it, gluing over and over and over. Dries quite quickly and it holds quite well. So I'm gonna come in, do that. And now this little bit of a platform that we've created here with our thread, we're gonna work off that with these other materials. So you don't have to worry about that being a bump there, okay? So you can see it did flare a little, but we didn't let it flare too much. But what that's gonna allow it to do is all that flash that's out here, it's gonna hold out at a bigger bulk. So it's not gonna look like it's just laying flat. It's gonna have a little bit of bulk to it, okay? So next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take a little bit of that SF blend that I had. So I got some SF blend here. I'm gonna fold that in half. But before I do that, I want to take the tips and just pull some longer and leave some shorter. We're just creating that profile that we want, right? That taper, we call it. And if I do it to one end, it naturally does it to the other, which is perfect. So I'm gonna fold it in half so I can tell where the halfway point would be. And then I'm gonna take that and I'm gonna tie it in here. And what this material is gonna do is it's gonna keep, like I said, all that flash from falling through. So again, I'm gonna take a couple thread wraps. This is also a slippery material, so your thread's gonna wanna come off of it quite easily. And this time I'm gonna push this around most of the hook. Okay, so I've used my thumb, I've pressed it around the edge of the hook. I'm gonna take a couple more thread wraps to secure that right where I wanted it. And I'm gonna flip all this material over, bring it back over top, and I'm gonna do exactly the same thing. I'm gonna work it all the way around the hook and secure it off. Okay, so this is gonna kind of be the underlying. Now you can see how that bucktail is holding that up already a little bit. That's all we want to make. All we wanted to get out of that is just a little bit of pressure holding that up, so it'll hold the flash up where we want it. So now I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna work with my flash material. Once I got that nice and solid, we're gonna use quite a bit of flash here. And so you can take a whole bunch of different colors of flash and blend them all together, but it takes quite a bit of time. So I think what's best is if we take, I like to use these blended ones that already have lots of colors in them. We're gonna grab a pretty good chunk of it. So you can see that might be a little bit much because we are gonna fold it back over itself. But we want the most of this tail to look is just like flash. So when it's doubled over, it's gonna be quite a bit. But that's a good finger, or again, pencil width worth of flash. And once you go in and you cut this, don't let go of it because it will all fall everywhere on you. So again, I'm holding this, I have it like this. I wanna come like this, and I'm gonna taper this again. So I'm gonna pull out some, so it's a little bit longer in places. And again, what that's gonna do is reciprocate it on the other end. Make sure it got a nice taper on the other end. If I need to go on the other side and do the same thing a little bit, I can do that. And then what I wanna do is find that halfway point. So I dangle it, okay, that's my halfway point. And I'm gonna come in on top. And I'm gonna first tie this first piece right on top, and I'm gonna use my thumb again to push it around to each side. So I'm gonna take a couple thread wraps, allow the tension of the bobbin to kind of hold it down for me. I'm gonna press it around, okay? So I'm trying to work that around the fly. And you can see how that flash just naturally wants to move wherever I send my thumb. So it's moving around, that's good. Now I'm going to pull up this second half, pull it all forward. Just going to put a couple more thread wraps just to make sure that first piece doesn't move on me. Good. I'm going to pull all that flash forward. Now work it to where I want it to go. Make sure that it's gone all the way around the edge of the fly. So you just kind of double check, make sure you got a good surrounding of it all. And then we're going to put some thread wraps over that, hold it into place. Just making sure you got some good coverage. So we want coverage all the way down the tail of the fly. Now again, I'm just going to take some thread wraps. I'm going to move those thread wraps up in front of that bump that I created. Go in again. Seal it. I'll put some resin. Lock it in place. Now when you got lots of this material that you kind of want to hold out of the way, it's good to use either like hair clips, or today I'm going to use this gator clamp. All that does is kind of hold everything out of the way, keep it where I want it. So the next piece of material that I'm going to put in, I actually don't think I mentioned this one to you, is this material, sometimes a little bit more difficult to find, but once you find it, it's not super expensive. It's called bait fish emulator flash. So basically what this is just like a polar chenille with lots of flash in it. It's on a, it's got this underlying thread base, this thing holding it all together. It's just longer. And you can get it all the way up to this length, which we'll use later, and that's 5.5 inches. So that's quite long. This is only 3 inches, I believe, something like that. So I'm just gonna cut off a piece of it. We're gonna tie in that underlying material that keeps it together and just advance our thread. So we're gonna move all the way forward. This is just gonna be what we would call the body material. So this is gonna build the bulk in the middle piece of the body. We're gonna move all the way up. We're gonna leave ourselves about 1/3 of the hook to work with. So we still have to build one more section of bucktail, and then we're gonna put the head on top of that. So all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna wrap this up the hook shank. And as I'm doing it, kind of palmering it, I'm gonna pull it back. I just wanna do kind of just nice open wraps. Don't wanna wrap over this material itself. So just try not to lock down too much of the actual flash material that we're using, but putting on as much of it kind of as we can. It's a super light material, sheds water when you pick it up. And that's half the battle with these pike flies is just having a material that shed water. And that's why we use bucktail, because it does the same thing. It gets rid of water in a big hurry, which is really what you want when you're picking up these big flies. These are a lot bigger streamers than we normally fish with. We are using bigger rods for it, but at the same time, we want to make sure that it sheds water as easily as possible. Okay, so we just make sure we got all the material that we were using headed in the rear direction. I'm just going to go ahead and quickly lay a thread base up to the eye, because I'm going to put in some bucktail now. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to pull this off for just a second, and I'm going to go in there with either a comb or a pick and just work out those fibers, make sure there's nothing trapped in. Got some nice bulk in there, and you can see that makes a nice taper as you wrap it forward up onto this portion of the fly. Kind of comb it all out. A lot of times these flies don't look like a whole lot till you get to the end stage, but again, I'm going to come in and just hold that material. Okay, so now I'm going to take another piece of bucktail. And the bucktail that I took this time was basically right from the bottom end of this section of bucktail. I want it to flare really well. What we're actually going to do is we're going to reverse tie it in. So it's going to be actually tied in backwards from the way we tied the other stuff. We're going to fold it back over, and that's how we're going to get this pretty much the biggest amount of flare that we can get out of this material. So about the same size of bucktail chunk. I've already cleaned this one out as well. Difference is this time, we're going to do what's called a reverse tie-in. So I've got all my fibers stacked. Normally you kind of have to work with your offhand a little bit. Advance this just a smidge. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay this material on here. I'm just going to loosely take my thread over with my opposite hand while I'm holding this with my dominant hand. gonna hold this like so. I'm then gonna take it and work it around. So you can see my fingers have just allowed that bucktail to spin all the way around the fly, and I'm gonna pull tight. Take a couple more thread wraps and really work that flare. So you can see how that flared right up. That's the kind of flare we want, and we're actually gonna push that back over. So what I'm using here is, you can use like an empty pen. This is actually, I think, from acrylex material, I think. It's just anything hollow you can get around the hook, and that's what's gonna push it back. And we're gonna build what we call a thread dam in front of it. And these thread dams can be a really frustrating piece to work with at times because they don't always work like we want them to. But first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pull all this material forward. You don't have to worry about ruining that flare because it's still gonna be there. I'm just gonna try to find my other clip. Again, I'm gonna clip this material up out of the way because what I wanna do is I wanna go in behind this and I wanna cut out all those butts that I left in there. So the best that you can, go in there, trim them out. Doesn't have to be perfect, you just don't wanna leave that huge piece in there. So when we're working with this material and what we're really trying to achieve is we're gonna put a little bit of a head material up at the top, but we want this flare to stay about there. So what that does is it creates a nice big water pushing surface for all these materials. If we have this big head up front, it's gonna move the most water. It's gonna create the most articulation in the water, okay? So what I wanna do is I'm gonna use this to pull this all back out of the way. I'm gonna pull my thread through because it was behind. And then I'm gonna just start working on what I call this thread dam. So I need it to be equal. I need it to have a taper down to the eye. So the most thread is gonna be right up next to the material. But what I need to do is I need to have it be even. So if I start getting this weird lean to that taper, what it does is it's gonna flare on one side of the bucktail or the other, and it's not gonna look like an equal flare all the way around. So from here, I'm just gonna kind of taper down to the eye, work my way back up, and every time just kind of pushing up against that bucktail. I'm not pulling hard, I'm just pushing up against it with thread wraps. And every so often you can check it and see where your flare is. So right now, I've now gone over halfway, I've pushed the flare back over center, but I still need some more because I don't want it to stand straight up. So again, I work some against the bucktail, and I come back forward, go back up against the bucktail, come back forward. I've got a little bit better taper. I'm gonna go a little bit more still. Remembering we are gonna put materials up here that are gonna hold it back a little bit. Just being careful that you don't wanna cinch down too tight up against it. You just wanna create this nice cone shape as you go. Come up against it one more time. So you can see that really nice cone I've created, and that is the taper that I want. I want it back at an angle. I don't want it standing straight up. And the next materials we put on it are gonna hold it down a bit, but it's not gonna pull it down all the way. So this time, I'm not gonna use as much of this SF blend, but I am gonna use SF blend again. So I took a smaller pinch this time. Again, I find my halfway point. I'm gonna put some UV on here to hold my work. This is a really good place to do it because you do not wanna lose that nice cone you've created. That's good. And guys, don't hesitate if you have questions at home when you're watching this, just to let us know. If you have any questions that we can answer, we'll do our best to do so. I know these are some new techniques that we don't really use in a lot of other instances, but that we use here. So don't hesitate, no stupid question. Okay. Kind of the problem with the UV resin is that it's very slippery as well when you put it on. Okay, I found my halfway point. I'm gonna tie this in. Put a couple wraps. I'm gonna spread this out again, so you can tell we've used a lot less this time. Put a couple more thread wraps, and I'm gonna bring this other piece back over. And this time I want to try to spread it the best that I can. Spread it out around as much of that area as I can. And I don't quite like how I didn't get all the way around, so I'm going to add just a little bit more to this one. I wasn't able to get all the way around. I had taken just not quite enough, which is easy enough to fix. You just grab a little bit more material and put on some more. We do the same thing, locking it in place. That's better. Let's put a little bit more to secure it. And basically all we have is one more material to put on, and then we'll put some eyes on, and we'll wrap up the fly. Okay, so we got that pulled back. I like that taper better. And now we're going to work with this not super awesome material to work with, but what it does create is a really nice head and a really flashy head. So now you can see that nice dome look that we're getting out of it. So you can imagine how that's going to move in the water. It's going to create really nice. So you can see it's like empty space in there, but that's what we wanted to create, the illusion of a big fly without having a ton of material. Okay, so we're going to do this with, so again, I'm using this Ripple Ice fiber. So it's kind of a really interesting synthetic material. So I want to take out a good sized pinch of it. That might have been a little too much. We can always add more if we need to as well. Again, just a really kind of interesting material to work with. It doesn't handle well, but what we're going to do is we're going to tie some in here, half it over, and put it back onto the other side and push it back, and we're just going to create this nice head with it. So a pinch that's about yay big. There's no exact science to this. It's, like I said, not a super easy material to work with, so once you get it in your hands, try to get it on your hook without losing it. So I've got that up there. I'm going to kind of spread it out a bit. I'm going to take one more thread wrap to secure that. I'm going to flip it over. I'm going to go with my other color. So I'm going to use like this. This is shrimp pink. Kind of looks like that orangey color we're going to put on the bottom side. Could imitate some of the gill area on a bait fish or whatever it is, just to kind of create that illusion. Again, super interesting material to work with. And there's going to be kind of lots of loose fibers going everywhere, and those will just work themselves out either in the water or when you comb this out a little bit at the end. So I'm going to take a couple thread wraps over that. Now I'm going to part them. Bring my thread up so it'll come through the best that I can. Try to part those materials and pull them rearward. And then get some thread wraps in front of it. And try to kind of pull the materials back through the hook. And so you see how you get this really nice flashy looking head with lots of bulk. We're just going to put some nice thread wraps in here, just kind of creating a nice thread base in front of it. Not trying to push them back too much because we're going to put eyes on that are going to kind of help create the style of head that we want. And now that I've got that there, I want you to go in and whip finish this. Trying to hold that material back out of the way. A 4 or 5 turn. This doesn't hold a great knot because it is such a slippery material, so important that you get some glue on it as quick as you can. That's good. We'll lock that in place so it's not going anywhere. Like I said, this stuff kind of has stray materials that you don't need to worry about clipping out. It's all creating to the illusion of what this pattern looks like. And it's not until it gets in the water. Everything will kind of find its shape and its taper. And it's going to move quite nicely in the water. So I mean, we're really working with a fly that's maybe 8 inches, 9 inches long, not crazy long. Lots of people may ask questions about not having a stinger in the back. In my experience, pike are they're not a nippy fish. They're not coming in and grabbing at the back end of a fly. They're very calculated in the way they strike, and normally it's a side profile bite on it. You're always getting them with that big long hook. And the good thing about pike is if they miss it the first time, good chances they're going to come and hit it about 3 more times. And you'll have the opportunity to hook them. So there's a couple different ways we can build heads for these guys. I'll show you what this looks like. So this is just a really big Fly Fishing Man Co. Clear head you could use. These ones work quite nicely. It obviously creates a very big head up at the top, and it kind of pushes all that flash material back. It doesn't make a bad head at all. I find them kind of gaudy and they are quite heavy, but they move water really nice. That's not what I'm going to use today. I'm going to show you how to do it kind of the old school way, and not even that old school, otherwise we'd actually be using not UV resin, but we're going to use UV resin for this today. So the eyes that we're going to put on, I'm just going to use these 3D big fish eyes. These are the 1/2-inch ones. Pretty good size for this fly. So when I'm doing this, I like to just stick them both in the back of my hand as I get going, because we're not actually worried about using the adhesive that's on the back of there, because we're going to end up gluing them on. So it's a good way to keep track of them when you're working with materials, especially something like this. You can stick them in the back of your hand. I'm going to go in and I'm going to put, this stuff is, again, I'm using Solar Res. This is the thin hard formula. It's kind of a mix between super thin and this stuff, which is the thicker stuff. We're going to go in and we're just going to put a dab, and we're going to keep it pretty close to the front of the fly. And this initial one is just to place this on. And so I'm keeping that quite close to the front of the fly. And all I'm going to do is that UV is going to get in through all those fibers, and it's going to cure that for us right away. And that's not worried about that being the sole thing that's holding that on there, because we're going to do something else to it still. I'll come over to the other side. You kind of like to gauge from the other side where you put the dot, so you get your eyes to look fairly symmetrical. I'm sure the fish do not care in the least, but just for our appearance purposes, stick that other eye on there. Just kind of hold it in place. And it's nice when you do a two-colored head, because you can 50-50 the eye on the two parting colors. See, it's a good way to tell where it is. A little bit more symmetrical. So you can see there how we secured our eyes. They look pretty good. I'm going to go in though, and I'm going to use some UV resin to create a bit of a head on this. So I'm going to lay down a little layer kind of between the eyes. I'm not going to go back behind the eyes, but basically mimicking what this did, but I'm going to do it with UV resin. And it's just to create durability to this fly. I don't want these eyes to fall off halfway through the first day I'm fishing with it. You want to be able to catch as many fish as you want until the hook rots off, kind of thing. These flies take a lot of material, and quite honestly, financially speaking, it's not a cheap fly. Really expensive to buy, probably approaching $25, $30. Not that you have that much cost in materials, but once you're at this point, you don't want this fly to die on you. So you take as much care as you can and making it as durable as possible. So all that's done is that on the top side has created a nice hard surface. It's kind of given a little bit more security for those eyes on both sides. And I'm going to come and I'm going to do the exact same thing on the bottom. And I'm not getting crazy with it. I'm just using this UV resin tip to kind of create what I want out of it. And I'm not making this huge amount of mess on here. I'm just working it around. Just enough to make that solid little bit of head there. Creates a little bit more durability. Make sure it's all nice and secure. And now those eyes don't only have that dot that's underneath there, but I can hardly even move them now because they're basically attached on the whole front half of the eye. So the likelihood of those coming off is pretty slim. And there we are. That is our flash tail blend pike fly. And this is, you can mess around with this in so many different color variations that you want. Lots of variations you can do with it. Change up the color of the flash and the tail, the bucktail, all of it. I would suggest though, if you're running with a scheme, really any color scheme, try to keep a lighter red or peachy color, shrimp color up under the gill plate. I don't know, I think it matters. Maybe it doesn't, but it just gives a more real illusion to what that looks like. When we pull this out, we get a look at kind of how that taper looks. You can see we've created a nice taper on this fly. So pretty simple, not a ton of different materials in there. But nice, it's very light, shed water easily. There you have it. That's our flash tail. All right. Okay, so next on the docket, we're gonna it's gonna repeat the process. This time I'm gonna take a little less time in explaining how I go through these techniques because I'm gonna be doing basically the same techniques over again. We're just gonna add a little bit of an articulation to this one, but this one will go by pretty quick. So I'm using this is actually an Owner's, again, a 6/0 SSW straight eye. This is a very aggressive looking bait style hook. This is what we're going to use on the back end of this one. It's quite an aggressive, very, very sharp hook. So you got to be very careful when you're tying with these as well that you don't get yourself tangled with them. Sometimes, at least what I find, the hardest part sometimes is getting a hook this large in your vise, and not all my vices will hold this. This is actually my only vise that'll hold a hook this size. So you got to have good jaws to do it. Okay, so we're going to start our thread again. I'm going to start up by the eye this time, and I'm just going to work a thread base back. I'll trim that off. And this time what I'm going to tie in is kind of a little interesting little thing. So this would be, I think they call it a walleye rattler. I think there is actual fly fishing ones that they've created now. They're not expensive. What that is just basically 3 little beads inside this plastic thing. So when you in the water, it kind of imitates like a Rapala. Every time that you strip that fly, that fish is going to be attracted to that noise as well. And these ones are kind of shaped nice. They have a spot for tie-in. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to wrap thread right through that. We're going to keep this one out at the back because we're going to cover lots of other materials over top of this. It won't be seen, it'll just be heard. So nothing crazy about it, just kind of locking it in the best that we can. And we'll secure it. Sometimes you'll even put 2 or 3 of these around the edge of a hook depending on how loud you want this fly to be. Now that I've got that in there, I'm just going to take, again, some UV. Make sure that this doesn't work or move on us. Paint it down really good. Lock that in place. Now this fly is going to be very, very similarly tied, a little bit different materials. This one, I use hackle tails off of a cape instead. So I'm going to use a couple of different tails. Same style of tying though, basically the same thing. Instead of a flash tail, we're using a hackle tail instead, or a cape. So again, sticking with natural materials, we could be using, really popular to use now is those, is using the wiggle tails. I'm blanking on the name of those other ones, those long skinny tails. But those are used quite commonly too. Dragon tails, that's what I was trying to say. So when I'm looking through a cape, I'm normally up near the head of the cape, you're gonna find a thicker feather. So the thicker, the better when it comes to this fly. Because we want to have that nice broad feather, kind of showing that striping pattern. So I'm gonna pull off, let's say 4 of each color. Yeah, it's 4. I'll take 2 from this fluorescent cape. This one has some really nice broad feathers at the back, so I'm going to be taking those ones to use. So I'll use 4 of those. 2, 3, 4. Okay. So first thing first here, we're gonna do one little layer of bucktail first. So this time I'm gonna be tying this one exclusively with black bucktail. The color scheme on this is basically gonna be black. We're gonna use this white baitfish emulator flash, and we're gonna use some black SF blend. So this is a very, very darkened color for this entire fly. So again, this first bit, because I don't want it to flare a ton, I'm gonna kind of pick it out of the middle of the cape somewhere, maybe even closer up towards the very tip of it. We're gonna take a chunk that's about pencil width in thickness. We're gonna cut it out, we're gonna clean it up. So always important to pull out. So when you go, you try to grab up near the tips, you pull out all that under that comes out and get it in the garbage. We'll work as much of that out as we can. Then try to realign the butts in your hand like I kind of taught you how, just by bumping the tips back together. Get rid of anything else that's not cooperating. We're going to move this up just ahead of where that rattler ended. We're going to try to, again, tie this in right on top. We're going to give it a little push, so it literally just, what it instantly did was enveloped that rattler, put some nice tension on it. It's going to flare for us a little bit. More or less, we're just putting a little bit of coverage there. I'm just going to take and actually wrap those butts down. I'm not even going to trim them out because they're the perfect length to wrap down. That's good. I'm going to go in with a little bit of that SF blend. So again, following that same modality that we did last time, where I'm going bucktail, then a synthetic that's going to give a little bit more coverage and hold up a little bit. So this time I'm just using SF flash blend. This is just a black purple UV. So I'm again going to taper it a little bit. Find the halfway point. I'm going to attach it. Take a couple good thread wraps. Push it around the edge a little bit. Flip it over top. Do the same thing again. And this one, on that second push around, I want to try to envelop most of the hook. So I'm getting good coverage all the way around. And now I got that nice dark tail, nice good taper. I'm just going to move up a little bit. And now I'm going to tie in my hackles. And I don't want these to extend way like this. We don't need this to be ridiculous because that's crazy. We want to bring them up so they basically work with the taper that we already have built in. So on this one, I'm going to get it to extend just beyond the back end of that SF blend. I'm just going to tie them in. We're not going to tie them in really any order or fashion. We're just going to work our way around, making sure we got good coverage of both colors represented. So I like to go one color than the other color. Just making sure I got good coverage. And most of these feathers, we're okay with them being about the same length, hanging out the back end. Don't use your dry fly hackle here, guys. That's not what it's designed for. It's very, very expensive, so make sure you're using stuff that's more designed for this. This wasn't a super expensive cape, maybe 80 bucks for the entire cape. And most of the stuff I tie off of this is like woolly bugger size or bigger, or I use it for streamer patterns. So definitely not a dry fly cape you're working with here. So like I said, just working our way around, going fluorescent and black and white, grizzly color. And so like I said before, I took 4 of each. And these are going to look really nice when they're all dancing in the water. This gives lots of movement. It's just a different way to design the tail. There's so many different tail materials, lots of synthetics, lots of naturals. Personally, I like the naturals probably more than the synthetics, but that being said, I also like using flash a lot too, which is synthetic. And these are always just fun flies to tie, because like I said before, a lot of it's experimentation. It's probably going to change lake to lake. It's going to change fish to fish. It's just fun to work with these different materials and doing some tying techniques that, let's be honest, are on a much larger scale than we're used to. So it's actually kind of fun to do. So now that we got them all on, we want to make sure they're secured. So I'm going to push a little bit of thread back, make sure they are where I want them to be. That's how we're going to finish off that back end. I'm going to whip finish it, glue it, and we'll move on to the next piece. That's good. Cut that off there. Glue it up. You can clean up this stuff by the eye, but it's really irrelevant because we're just going to put wire to connect the two. Maybe if it's your ADD that makes you want to do it, or your OCD. But besides that, I'm not too worried about it. So we can pop that chunk out of the vise. So this is obviously going to create a little bit longer fly pattern than the last one because we've got that extra hook behind, but that's basically what we're left with for the tail. So we've got that inside pieces to create the bulk to hold out the tail. And then we're gonna go in, I'm gonna use that same size 6/0 Partridge Universal Predator X as our front hook. We'll go in and get that secured. Half the time the battle is just getting it secured properly, because you really don't want this moving when you're tugging on it. Okay, so now we're just going to repeat the process that we basically did on the last fly, except we're not going to be putting in all that flash at the back end here. So the only difference is we're leaving the flash out. We're going to move forward bucktail, SF blend. We're going to do our bait fish flash. Then we're going to go up to the top and and finish off the way we did. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is we need to attach that back piece to the front. So I'm going to use this beetle-on wire today. It's just a craft wire. You can get it in different strands and strengths. This is the 7-strand. I think it's more than enough. Some guys disagree. They use different wire. I've never had one break on me or pull out if you tie it in properly. Find my pliers. There they are. Don't cut this stuff with your scissors because it will ruin it in a big hurry. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to... Hey, Dane. I am just going to double over this wire. So I've taken a pretty good chunk, I've doubled it over, and so I'm going to basically using the strength of it twice. Okay, so I'm going to find that other piece I laid down here. What I'm going to do, just give me 1 second, I'm just going to grab one bead that I forgot to grab ahead of time. So you can use any type of bead here. I'm just going to use a glass bead, just quite a large one. We'll do this one in, let's say, green. I'm just going to use 2 of them. All this is to try to kind of prevent some foul hooking of the fly itself, but normally that's not a big issue with this big a fly, in my experience anyways. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put, so again, I've doubled over that wire, so it's twice as wide. I've got twice the strength. I'm going to put it through the eye of that back end hook. Everybody kind of has a little different way they like to tie in. I like to prep it like this. So I put it through first, so it's hanging like so. I got my doubled over wire, so now I have 4 strands up here at the top. I'm going to go and put my beads on. Work the first one through, second one through. I'm going to push them down reasonably close, but leaving a little bit of a loop there at the end. Now go ahead and start your thread on the hook. I'm going to lay down a nice thread base here. I know none of this is going to move on me. And again, we want to stay on top of the hook. We don't want to go down around the bend, so we're not going to go back past, at least on this hook, we're not going back past that the barb. Then all I'm going to do is I'm going to come back here. So I've left what I talked about, how I left that loop there. I'm just going to kind of imitate and make sure it stays where I want it to. I'm going to lay this wire down on top. Take some thread wraps to start to secure it. I'm just going to advance that thread forward. I'm not going to go quite to the head. I'm going to take that wire and I'm going to fold it back on itself. So I'm really gaining the strength of that. I know it's not going to pull out on me. Wrapping forward. I'm going to secure that all the way back towards the beads and that tie-in point. So once I get back to my tie-in point, that's what we want it to look like from there. Just so happens that this material clip is about the perfect place for this. So all of this we're going to keep back out of the way the best we can. It's always kind of tough when you're working with these bigger flies. So then I'm going to go back in and I'm going to grab that same chunk of bucktail. Again, I'm going to go from the middle of the fly because I don't want to have the big flare. I'm not reverse tying this yet. So I don't want a huge flare. So I'm going to go from somewhere in the middle. And sometimes you have to adjust where you're pulling from because there's just different lengths to the hair. And you do want to be using as long of fibers as possible, so sometimes you have to kind of move and choose where you pick from. I've had lots of people ask me, well, I feel like I used the whole bucktail and then, you know, I've only actually used the edges. I haven't used the whole thing. I just end up using what seems like the edge of the bucktail. And I wouldn't disagree with you. Like when I'm done with one, you're going to have a strip right down the middle of the bucktail that you haven't used. But that's also great hair for doing other things with, because it is still a deer hair. That middle stuff is not as reactive to the techniques that we want to use for these flies, but yes, I would agree we do waste some bucktail when we do this, because what we want is, when you're taking the time to tie with bucktail, you really don't want to mess it up. You want to use the best of the best, because you don't want to be retying it a whole bunch of times. So now that I've cleaned that back end out, I'm going to come up here. I'm going to take some thread wraps around it. A little bit of tension there. I'm going to push it around the edge of the hook. I'm going to pull it tight. You're going to see I'm going to get a little bit of flare there, which is good. Not a ton, but a little. It's probably perfect for what we want there. I'm going to take a few wraps forward through that bucktail so it's really secured down. Then I'm going to go in and I'm going to trim out. I'm going to trim out all that underside. Try not to snip your threads. It's good. Secure that down a bit. And now what I want to do is I'm going to take that SF blend that I was using before, that black stuff. This is another material that's terrible to work with, because they come in these packages that if you pull on it, you end up wasting a whole bunch because it pulls out more than you need, and it's kind of a difficult thing to work with. So I'm going to take off a decent pinch, not a huge amount again, about the same amount we used last time. So I'm looking at about like this. Actually, before I fold it over, I'm going to pull a little bit of a taper into it. Find my halfway point is there. So overall, this fly is going to look a lot bulkier and quite a bit larger than the last one, just because we're using a little bit more material and a little bit more length by adding in that back piece as well. Wrap forward just a little bit. Just want to get over that bump, and then I'm going to take all that material, fold it back over. This just, by moving that thread forward a little bit, guys, it actually creates more taper to it, because you're moving more of that material forward before you push it back. Making sure I got good coverage. I'm going to have to wrap back up onto that bump just to secure it. It's good, and I want to pull it out. Comb it out a little bit as I go. So you can see how light and fluffy that actually is. It's not taking a ton of material in there. It's perfect. I'm going to touch this with a little bit of glue because to save all my work. Good. So now I'm at the point where I want to work with that SF blend again. So I'm gonna, this time I'm gonna work with this stuff. It's quite a bit longer. So this is 5.5 inch. So I actually end up trimming a little bit of it because I like it to be longer, but not that long. So I'm gonna take a chunk of it. What I'm actually gonna do is I'm gonna take it, fold it together, like to pull it down and find the ends. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to come in here and kind of cut at an angle and be cutting up into it as I go around. So I'm going to be here, cut, 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 to shorten it. I'm just not going to do it over the table and do it over the garbage. What that does is kind of create a taper in it as well. And it doesn't have to be perfect. We just don't want it to be as long as it is right now. So when I come back to it, I just cut off some length. I'm going to take it back one more time and adjust the length a little bit more. I want it to be about that kind of 4-inch mark, not 5.5. Then we're gonna tie it in just like we did the last time. So I'm gonna secure that underlying kind of rope material. I'm gonna move my thread forward, just like we're gonna build that head again up near the top. And I'm gonna try to open this up, so it's gonna create a lot more bulk this time. It's a little bit longer. And I'm just gonna wrap it forward. Nice touching wraps again. Open it up. This is gonna be kind of the only light colored material we use in this one, so it's gonna create a little bit of lighter flash in the middle of the fly. And that'll be about it, because everything else is pretty dark. I'm going to secure that off. And then try to work that out again like I did last time. You can go in there with a pick or a comb. Always being mindful that that other hook is in the back end there, so it can be really not a lot of fun on your hands if you're not careful. So if it doesn't fit in a material clip, it's a good time to maybe even put in like a little eraser end on it or something so it doesn't jab you. Okay. So we got one more section of bucktail to go. And we're gonna take it from that right at the butt end, the nice long fibers that we can. And we know it's gonna flare really nice for us. Take off a nice good chunk again, about that pencil width. Sometimes can be tough to get a hold of it really well, but kind of want to get as long of fibers as you can that are near the back. It's going to create the best situation for the head of this fly. And if you cut some off and it doesn't work out, always just go back to the tail and get some more. Sometimes it doesn't always work like you hope it will. Sometimes this bucktail can be kind of messy to work with, but you just gotta try to just work with it and get it stacked up the best you can. That clump worked out quite nicely. It's quite large. And remembering I gotta switch my hands because I want to tie this one in reverse. I really want to utilize as much of this bucktail as I can, so I'm going to try to tie in a little closer to the butts this time. Take a couple wraps. I'm going to go 3 times. Start to tighten down a little. You start to watch it flare. And I want to make sure with my thumbs that I've worked it all the way around. Do a little check. Make sure it's surrounded, and I see that it is. Then I flare. Pull nice and tight and flare. It's good. You can kind of take a look from the front end and make sure you got a nice amount of it there. I'm going to pull it forward just for a second to snip out the butts. There wasn't a ton on this one because I did a little bit better job. Still want to just go in there and kind of clean it up a bit. Not super crucial that it's super clean. I'm just going to use my hollow device here to work this back a little bit more. Pull this like so. Pull my thread forward. I'm just going to work on creating that shape again. So just like last time, work forward, work back. I'm just trying to create that nice triangle shape. Working that flare up against that every time. I left myself quite a bit more space at the front this time. It's not a big deal. We're going to put more material in front of this still. So I'm just having a little bit bigger cone than I did last time. Remembering not to pull too much tension when you're up close to the bucktail. You don't want to pull a bunch of, like right now, I wouldn't want to pinch down really hard. I want to just be a little bit lighter and just putting wraps on it to hold it back out of place. like that. It's a good flare. I'll leave this one standing a little higher because I'm going to put a little bit more material than I did last time on this one. So now I'm going to go back this time for the head material. I'm actually not going to use the Ripple Ice fiber. I'm going to use some SF blend. So I'm just going to reuse what I used last time, or used back in the body. But first, I'm going to put one more layer of that full length back into the body, just to create a little bit more bulk up at the head, because I want it to look bulky at the head and then kind of work its taper out towards the rear of the fly. So again, find my halfway mark. I'm going to lay it on there. Take a couple thread wraps. Spread it out the best that I can. I'm going to take that wrap almost back to the eye of the hook so I can feel where it is. You can comb this into it. I'm going to flip this over. Come back, and this time I really want to work that material all the way around if I can. Make sure you get it nice and secure. You can check your work, and if you see, like for me right now, I can see I've got a light spot on the back. All I'm going to do is grab a little bit more of that material and attach it to the back end. Just because we want full coverage at this headpiece, because this is basically where we're going to finish off this head. Attach it, fold it back over and spread it out. Comb it in. You can normally move it still a little bit before you've glued it if you work your fingers around till you get it to where you want it, and you can see you got good coverage. You can really secure it down. I like the look of that a lot more. So at this point, cover up my work, and I'm going to put, so this time instead of building a head out of another material, I'm just using that SF blend to finish it off so we get that nice hollow shape, and I'm going to go in and put the eyes at the front. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to whip finish this one. Problem is you get so many materials out that you can't find where anything is. Come in and whip finish. Make sure it's on there really well. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to touch my clear resin to it. Make sure that those thread wraps don't go anywhere. And then we're going to come in and we're going to put our eyes in. So you can see this is a lot bulkier fly, and it won't really be till I hold it up for you that you kind of see the shape that's created by all this kind of havoc we have here. Okay, then we're going to go back and grab some eyes. Put 2 on again. Okay, so I'm going to do exactly like I did last time. I'm going to pull these back and just put a dot of this little bit thicker resin. Just trying to keep it right on the side of the fly. Put a pretty good dot in there. I'm going to set my eye on it and kind of press it in. And then I'm just going to UV underneath so that UV rays get underneath it. I'll lock that to where I have it. So you can see where I've left it. Come to the other side. Do the same thing. Put that down. Put a good dab there as well. Again, you're trying to sort of gauge that you've got it about where you had the last one. So I like to take a quick look at it. Looks about right. And I'm going to torch it again so it stays in place. Now I'm going to come up and create that shape that I did last time. So this time I'm gonna pull this one, I'm gonna pull all these materials back and kind of hold them with my hand. We're gonna create a little bit bulkier head this time. So I wanna almost hold that shape so that it doesn't move. And I'm gonna come and fill in on top of here. This is gonna create much more of a head like that, that Fly Fisherman Co. one does. We're gonna create a little bit thinner nose on this one than the last one. We've got a lot more materials that we're working with here. And you kind of just got to take it in little steps and little stages. Cure a bit, fill in if you see a gap that you want to fill in. Again, doesn't have to be perfect. You kind of are the limitation or the limiting factor of what you want to do with it. What I just want to make sure that I do is those eyes should stay about where you're holding them. They shouldn't be able to move out away, so if they do like mine just did, I just got to add a little bit more resin to the edges, hold it in place, and torch them down. Now I'm going to do the exact same thing from the bottom. And this material is a little bit easier to put this resin on because it's not that ripple ice fiber that's got fibers kind of going everywhere. I want to work around to the front edges of it as well on both sides. Make sure it's locked in and not going anywhere. Lock that down. There we go, and just kind of test it out. Make sure you don't have more movement than you want. You don't have any sharp edges on those eyes. So what I've done is I want those eyes to be covered in resin just up over the lip of them. So I've like just created this nice little, almost like a bill. So if you think about like a Rapala or something like that on a more conventional gear, it has a bill on it. And depending on the shape that you create out of the head, what it actually does is it creates how it goes in the water. So it might dart, it might dive, just according to how you've created that. So I just see one little last thing I want to do just on top, and then I'm going to call this a wrap. Put one more little layer. And that's going to be it. So again, same style as the flash blend tail. This time we just used a cape and longer cape feathers to create the back end. When I take it off here, you'll see kind of the taper we've created. Once you get all the hooks undone, and remember there is that other hook in the back end, so beware of your fingers. So, you can see the taper we've created. Nice big mid-body section, tapers out into our tail. All of that is going to shed water really well. Every time we pick it up, that water should fall right off. The way we kind of created that nose is different than the last time, so this one is got a little bit more, it's a little bit sharper nose, flatter head. It's going to dart and dive a little bit different than the one that we left, a lot kind of more broad in shape. Okay, so those are just a couple of my pike flies. These are kind of my go-to. Besides a big clouser, these are basically the only patterns I fish most of the time. Really good flies. Okay, guys, I want to thank you again for tuning in. We're grateful for Darkwoods Brewing to allow us to be here today. And we will be back to you again next week, and we'll keep you in the loop as to where we'll be. Okay, thanks again, guys. It's Tim here with Fly Fishing Outfitters. Take care. We'll catch you next time.